So, dear members of the European Parliament, dear listeners from all sides in Europe, and first of all, dear Commissioner-designate Helena Dalli, highly welcome here as Commissioner-designate for Equality to this joint hearing that I am happy to co-chair with Mrs. Durish Nikolsonova. I'm also very happy that the LIBE committee, which is associated to this hearing, is represented today. It's a great success that we will have an own Commissioner for Equality in the future, really something new for the European institutions. Before we start our hearing, let me recall that, in line with the guidelines for the approval of the Commission, Annex 7 to the Rules of Procedure, the Parliament evaluates Commissioners-designate on the basis of their general competence, of their European commitments, their personal independence, and it also assesses the knowledge of their perspective portfolio and their communication skills. Let me also recall that before the hearing, the Commissioner-designate had replied in writing to a preparatory questionnaire. The written answers have been distributed to the members in all languages. Finally, please note that the Committee on Legal Affairs has raised no objection to the holding of the hearing.
Hello to everybody. Let me welcome you here at the hearing of the Commissioner-designate Madame Dalli that we warmly welcome here. Let me introduce you to the structure of today's debate. First, the floor will go to Madame Dalli, and she will have 15 minutes to introduce her portfolio, her priorities. Then we will get to 25 questions from MEPs, and that would be in 2 rounds. The first round, that means 7 questions, will be asked by representatives of political groups. And then the second round, which means the 18 questions, is based on the overall distribution of questions among the political groups, including also a representative from the non-attached members. Now, the debate will be held in accordance with slots. Each of consists of 5 minutes. That means 1 minute for question, 2 minutes for answer, then 1 minute to the same member to follow-up question, and then 1 minute for the answer. Please, the timing is very, very tight, so we will be very strict in measuring the time. Therefore, we have the hammer here, right? And we are not afraid to use it. So please be careful and with the timing so that everything goes smoothly. Yesterday we had a first hearing with Ms. Commissioner-designate Schmidt, and everything went just perfectly smooth. So, please note that the interpretation will be provided in 23 languages, reflecting the linguistic diversity of our House. All speakers can therefore use their own language, but I would like to remind speakers that what they say will need to be interpreted. Therefore, whatever language you use, please do not talk too quickly. Always have on mind that the interpreters will do their best to translate it. Finally, the debate will be streamed live on the Parliament's internet site. It will also be possible to access a video recording of the hearing on the same site. Now, this is all the technical information, and now let's just start.
Exactly. The floor is yours, Commissioner-designate. Please don't exceed the 15 minutes that are given for your introductory remarks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Onorevoli Presidenti,
Honorable Presidents, honorable members, It is my pleasure and honor to be here before you today. I would have never imagined that I would have the opportunity to discuss something I have dedicated my political life to, equality, after being nominated to advance this portfolio on a European level. In this Parliament, ideas are discussed from different perspectives, and I am convinced that what unites us is far greater than what divides us.
Equality is an infinite resource. Indeed, there is enough equality for everyone, and we can sustain it. On the other hand, discrimination excludes, marginalizes, and leads members of society to the brink. Discrimination is a wasteful practice. It robs members of society of their well-being, fulfillment, and prosperity. Yes, discrimination harms individuals and minorities directly, but it also harms society as a whole, as it disconnects relations, diminishes trust, and alienates people. The setting up of equality as a portfolio in itself is a bold statement by President-elect von der Leyen towards a vision of a Europe where human dignity and human rights, freedoms, democracy, and the rule of law are strengthened and brought further to the fore. A Europe free from discrimination. This development follows on her publication of the first political guidelines that contain a whole section on equality with clear measures that must be implemented during this term and the setting up of the first gender-balanced commission. The President-elect laid out her vision, and if I have your support following this hearing, I am ready to work hard with the task force on equality that is purposely being set up on a permanent basis, composed of senior representatives from all services of the Commission and the European External Action Service, and chaired by the Deputy Secretary General in charge of policy coordination. And this, together with my cabinet, the Directorates General, the thematic gender equality and anti-discrimination high-level groups, the European Institute for Gender Equality, and the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights to deliver on all of these measures. Additionally, I intend to work in dialogue with you, the members of the European Parliament, as well as member states and civil society. I intend to work collaboratively with all, free from finger-pointing, to elevate this area both within the European Union and also externally. During the conversations that I had with many of you here, as well as with anti-discrimination intergroups here at the European Parliament and umbrella civil society anti-discrimination networks in the past weeks, I found a lot of common ground. There is agreement that we need to step up our resolve for gender equality and the fight against gendered violence and multiple discrimination, as well as promote equality on the grounds of race and ethnic origin, age, disability, religion or belief, and sexual orientation. In the conversations that I had, many have expressed their support for this portfolio's orientation, including its vertical and horizontal dimensions, and asked me to flesh out my vision for how it is to be implemented. Equality needs to be enjoyed by everyone, and we all need to be part of its growth process. The European Union needs to continue to take a leading global role in this area. All my life, I have done anything and everything in my power to improve the lives of citizens. I entered politics, perhaps like many of you in this room, when I was a 17-year-old student, full of enthusiasm and commitment, full of idealism, with faith that by engaging, listening, campaigning every single day, I would be able to bring about positive change in society. Many years later, all I know is that this fight is far from over. But I learned an important lesson, that real change is only possible if we, the politicians, have the courage to make change happen at all levels of governance. The 21st century must be the century of women being equal. Exactly 40 years ago, in 1979, Simone Weil was elected as the first female president of this parliament, one of the largest democratic assemblies in the world. Today, in 2019, we need to ensure that women have the right to be equal in all the spheres of their lives through an ambitious gender mainstreaming process, both within the European Union institutions and their respective outputs. This is why, if confirmed by you, I will use my energy, my experience, and my conviction to build fairer societies in our Union, ones in which, in the words of President-elect von der Leyen, those who share the same aspirations will have the same opportunities to fulfill them. I know that this is an uphill struggle. As a minister responsible for European affairs and equality at the national level, I worked hard to fight societal stereotypes, table legislative proposals, adopt strategies, and stand the ground against calls to water down equality initiatives. As a commissioner, I will need to use a similar approach and work with member states to convince them that taking action at the EU level is the right way to go. Because promoting inclusion and fostering equality are European issues as much as tackling climate change or solving economic crisis. It's a fight which deserves a European response, and it needs our full attention. Let me just give you a few figures, as sometimes numbers can say more than words. In the European Union, 31% of women work part-time, largely because they bear most of the caring responsibilities for children and the elderly. 1 in 3 women are subject to gender-based violence at least once in their adult life. More than half of Muslims looking for housing feel discriminated against because of their first or last names. 80% of Roma persons are below their country's at risk of poverty threshold. 50% of citizens with a disability have no access to work and are excluded. Older persons receive on average of 39% less invitations for job interviews, even when they have identical profiles with younger job seekers. 2 in 5 trans persons are victims of violence every year. And in at least 21 member states, medical interventions are carried out to impose a sex on intersex children. This gross discrimination may be further compounded when individuals are targeted on multiple grounds. We need to take action and live up to the values that the European Union holds very dear. Honourable members, I will make the fight for inclusion in the EU my personal fight. I will not hesitate to use every tool to promote equality and to strengthen Europe's commitment to inclusion in all of its forms. I want to focus my work in particular on three strands: the fight against discrimination in all of its senses, the inclusion and empowerment of women, the promotion of equality and full participation. All these for women and men, racial and ethnic minorities, religious and non-religious minorities, persons with disability, older and younger persons, and LGBTI persons. Right from the beginning of my mandate, I will seek support from my fellow commissioners in proposing whatever is needed to advance equality in the EU and also externally. To serve this purpose, I will establish within the first 3 months of this Commission mandate the Task Force on Equality. It will be mandated with the complicated mission of swiftly building an intersectional approach for equality in all the policies of the EU. My intention is that the task force is operational soon and that it is well equipped to tackle the huge task of mainstreaming equality in the EU. Concurrently, I will put forward a new European gender strategy, which will include new legislative proposals as well as incisive policy measures. It is high time the Commission delivers on this call by you MEPs and civil society alike. Within this framework and the first 100 days, I will propose new measures to address pay transparency, one of the key priorities throughout my mandate. I will insist we continue working on the gender pay gap and the pensions gap until we know that who we are does not dictate our chances of being paid the same as others for the same work. As Commissioner for Equality, I will closely monitor that the Work-Life Balance Directive is fully and properly implemented in all member states. I cannot accept that the economic loss due to the gender employment gap still amounts to 370 billion euros per year. I want work-life balance to be a success story. I will continue to work throughout my mandate on women's empowerment and see, together with member states, that gender stereotypes are tackled and childcare and care facilities are improved. I will prioritize the inclusion of persons with disabilities. I will make sure that all EU sector legislation pays attention to the issue of disability. In 2020, it is expected that 1 in 6 EU citizens will live to some degree with a disability. In this regard, I will give priority to the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. An evaluation of the current strategy is also underway. I want to sit down with you, honourable members, and discuss how to move this policy framework forward. I will do everything in my power to advance key legislation in the equality area. As a minister, I participated to endless debates in Council on proposals that have remained blocked for too long. The Horizontal Anti-Discrimination Directive was proposed more than 11 years ago. The Women on Boards Directive dates back to 2012. The proposal for the EU's accession to the Council of Europe Istanbul Convention dates from 2016. How can I explain that to our citizens? In this framework, should I not be able to remove the outstanding stumbling blocks and to convince the remaining sceptical member states in Council, I will not hold back from finding new remedies and propose new legislation. Honourable members, we owe this political transformation to our citizens who are excluded, who are struggling to make ends meet because of discrimination, and who are suffering from violence. Equality is not a zero-sum game. The empowerment of women and persons coming from minority backgrounds is of benefit to all. Finally, I heartily welcome the inclusion of a gender mainstreaming question in the written question for all the college. Equality mainstreaming is the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dalli, for your presentation. We come right now to our round of questions for the political coordinators, and I give the word straight to Frances Fitzgerald, please.
To Dalli, your record as an equality champion while Minister in Malta is well known and appreciated, and I was very impressed when I met you. Your commitment and competence are well established. However, as the first speaker to question you, it would be remiss of me not to raise this issue. This Parliament has concerns with the situation in Malta and the record and values of the government you have been part of for the past 6 years in relation to 2 specific issues. First of all, in relation to the assassination of investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, whose family may indeed be watching today. Are you satisfied yourself with the progress to date with the investigation and public inquiry? How would you seek to protect journalists in your role as Commissioner to prevent such a horrendous crime happening again, given your experience in Malta? This is an opportunity for you to address and clarify your views. Secondly, in relation to the Panama Papers and the involvement of one of your fellow ministers, do you agree with that minister's actions at the time? What lessons have you learned from government at that point, and how would you put them into practice in your role as Commissioner?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for your appreciation. And I must say that the feeling is mutual. Yes, you mentioned the brutal crime of Daphne Caruana, of the femicide of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, and I must say that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures. And in fact, we wanted to have the involvement of European institutions, such as Europol and the NFI, and even international institutions such as the FBI. I remember being myself saying that NFI should investigate, because I had already experience of them, because I had brought the NFI in Malta to train our police in forensic investigations. So I had an experience of how very good they are. And I must say, there has been significant progress. Like in 50 days, three persons were arrested and placed under indictment. And this is something which is still ongoing, as you know. But with reference to the other part of your question, I will do all my power to guarantee free press, free from harassment or intimidation. With regards to your second part of the question, and you ask whether I agree, and I say no, I do not agree. I would have done things totally different. Throughout my political career, I stood up for good governance and the rule of law and democracy. And as minister, I pushed for the introduction of a commissioner for standards in public life, which is now in place.
Sorry, I'm very strict already in the
Okay.
beginning. In order to remind you that we have this rule, 1 minute for the questions, 2 minutes for the answer, 1 minute for a follow-up, 1 minute for the follow-up answer. And I'm already quite strict in the beginning in order to remind all members to respect the rules, please. And of course, you, Commissioner-designate. So with I give the word back to Francis Fitzgerald for the follow-up question.
Thank you for your response. Obviously, issues around the rule of law, freedom of the press and justice are central to any equality or indeed gender strategy, and that's why I asked those questions, as well as because of the concern about those issues across this Parliament. But returning to the gender equality strategy that you intend to build, could I ask you to outline in some detail how you intend to build that strategy? What methodology do you intend to use? What consultation with NGOs? And perhaps you would outline the kind of timetable that you envisage.
Thank you. As we know, there's so much that we have to do, but this gender strategy will contain pay transparency, gender participation, the pay and pension gap, violence against women. It will address gender stereotypes, because, as you know, it is pointless legislating unless we change attitudes and unless we change cultures. So there will be a specific section on how to address gender stereotypes. There will also be a chapter on work-life balance. So all that we are going to do throughout this mandate vis-à-vis gender equality will be part of the strategy.
Madam Regner, your question.
So now I'm asking on behalf of the S&D group. So the European Union strategy for gender equality is worth more than a follow-up question. So my question is going exactly in this direction. You, Commissioner-designate, highlight among your priorities the European Union strategy for gender equality. Can you guarantee a binding communication from the Commission? What will be the means and the tools in order to implement it? Do you think of monitoring tools, of benchmarks, sanctions, and will the commonly known as Women on Boards Directive be part of this strategy? So which concrete actions are you going to take to unblock the unbearable situation in the Council and keeping the binding 40% target? What do you aim in and what will you do on that?
Madam Commissioner.
Yes, certainly I will be working to unblock the Women on Boards directive. It's a shame that it's been there for too long. I remember one of my first actions as minister was to change my country's position on that. And so you can understand my willingness and my commitment to deal with this Women on Boards proposal and actually make it happen. So I will engage with the member states and convince them of the added value to unblock this file in Council. Of course, you asked me about the gender equality strategy, and it will be an important, a very important strategy for us all, and it will be issued shortly. And I will be taking also obviously into account the stakeholders' consultations and engage further, and also will develop the necessary tools to bring gender mainstreaming across EU policies to another level. As you know, this will be also the work of the task force, which will be working across DGs in order to see that gender mainstreaming is really materializing.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
So I refer back to the Women on Boards Directive. Are you going to propose any changes to the text that is already on the table for so many years, as you mentioned that? And do you plan any other measures to achieve equal representation of men and women in European top positions?
Well, I think it is a balanced proposal, and I will meet with all ministers which have a reservation on this proposal and push for a general approach in Council.
Thank you very much. Now I'm just taking back the word as chair and give the word right now to our next speaker for Renew, Ms. Irène Tolleré.
Bonjour. Good afternoon. As you said, and rightly so, 40 years ago, Simone Veil was elected the first woman president of the European Parliament, the first president of the European Parliament, and she became our icon. But her legacy is under threat as the imprisonment of a Moroccan journalist on charges of abortion reminded us. And then so many women cannot access legal abortions. This is unacceptable. It even flies in the face of the values that we raise: dignity, respect, freedom on the basis of Article 2 of the treaty. And of course, this falls within the remit of your portfolio. Women's rights are human rights. If you're confirmed as Commissioner, could you describe 3 specific actions in order to improve access to sexual and reproductive rights in the EU? What form will these take? When will you do this? And will you work hand in hand with a health commissioner in order to better include sexual and reproductive rights in a future EU strategy on health? Thank you.
Designate.
Yes, as you rightly say, women's rights are human rights. I am a committed feminist, and you have my word that I will do all possible in order to protect SRHR. So I will work with the task force to also to mainstream the SRHR and to especially with in dialogue with the health commissioner, and we will stay strong with each and every step if I encounter resistance. So, but I believe that when you stand your ground, you do find allies to build coalitions for the willing. So we also need to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals on women's health and universal access to sexual and reproductive care and family planning and education. So you have my word that this is a guarantee that sexual and reproductive rights without exception.
So please, there is the follow-up question.
Follow-up question was all these attacks are, in a summary, an attack against the equality for the gender, the choice to love who we want and live our life as we want. So what sort of action would you be ready to do to counter all the attacks against all this gender equality and choice to live freely?
Commissioner, micro. Micro.
I think we should stand our ground with our work, and we have to encounter this resistance by being strong, by fighting it. And as I said before, that we do find allies to build our coalitions of the willing with, and we really must persevere and not give up. I mean, these things are happening around us, but we must be strong and fight them.
Thank you. The next speaker will be for the Greens, Ms. Alice Bah-Kuhnke. Please.
Thank you, Mrs. Dalli. To achieve true gender equality, we need, as you said, to adopt an intersectional lens. Until now, the specific forms of discrimination faced by Muslim and Black women, LGBTI persons, women with disabilities, migrant women, or women from diverse minorities have not been properly addressed by the European Union equality policies. It is positive that we, for the first time, will have a commissioner in charge of equality. However, racial equality and diversity are not mentioned in your list of responsibilities. You have said that you want to unblock and adopt the Horizontal Anti-Discrimination Directive. So, Mrs. Dalli, how do you expect to build a political majority to unblock the directive in the Council? What concrete actions will you take? And if you can't unblock the directive, will you propose a new directive? And will you also commit to an intersectional approach in order to ensure a comprehensive protection against discrimination based on all grounds? Thank you.
So please, Commissioner-designate.
Yes. The horizontal directive, you speak about the horizontal.
I speak about the Horizontal Anti-Discrimination Directive.
Yes. Okay. So I shall first wait for the outcome of the EBSCO meeting on the 24th October, which should be discussing this anti-discrimination directive, and then I shall proceed from there. But it is my will to unblock this directive, because as you rightly say, discrimination is still highly prevalent, and the protections against discrimination outside employment in the EU are not guaranteed. So, of course, it is a challenge, as you know, because unanimity is required in Council, but I will speak to all the ministers concerned, because we need to find a way forward fast. So it's also very good that we have the high-level groups which do a lot of work, and it's important to have strong equality bodies. I think this is key, and also the equality charters are essential. But I will pursue in my endeavor to unblock this anti-discrimination directive.
Ms. Kuhnke, please, the follow-up question.
To mobilize support for a new inclusive directive, you will, as you said, also need internal support from other commissioners, like your Vice President, Mr. Skinas, who has been tasked with protecting the European way of life. And you will also need the support from Ursula von der Leyen herself. And as you said, she has the plan to set up a task force. How will you, from your responsibility, work within the task force to mobilize support for your ideas? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, as you rightly say, I have to work with Vice President Skinas, and we both agree that equality is a European way of life. So we are agreeing on that. And with President von der Leyen, the fact that she put equality in a portfolio on its own shows her determination in this area of policy, and also the setting up of this task force, which will be operated by high-level officers in all the DGs. That it's a very good message that we want to get the work done, and we will get the work done.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mrs. Christine Anderson from ID, please.
Yes, guten Morgen, oder guten Tag vielmehr, Frau.
Good afternoon, Ms. Dalli. You said that you were going to work in favor of a situation where all people could choose freely what gender they felt they belonged to.
I want to interrupt you, but it seems that it takes some time for the translation. So please, could you wait a little moment and then to start your question again?
Okay.
Thank you.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau Dalli.
Please, one little moment. Two.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
So could you please repeat your question now? Thank you.
You're all set? Great. Sehr geehrte Frau Dalli.
Ms. Dalli, you said before that you would work towards a situation where people could choose freely what gender they felt that they belonged to. In the United States, in some of the states, there's a practice where people can change their gender by simply an expression of what they want. And that decision would then have to be accepted. How do you feel about this practice? Do you think it makes sense? And would you, as a commissioner, be in favor of such far-ranging self-determination?
I hope you had the translation. I give the word to Commissioner-designate.
Yes, I agree with the legislation you refer to. In fact, I passed this legislation in my country, and it's a legislation which I passed after I met with people and I heard their stories. I met with families who had transgender, intersex children, and they told me of the pain and the suffering which these families go through. And some people did not want, like in the case of trans people, they did not want to undergo gender reassignment surgery, but they had these young people at home who did not want to go out because their name did not correspond with the person you are seeing. And I had the sad story of a young girl who committed suicide because she wouldn't go out because she was ashamed, because her identification card, her passport, her school results had the name of a boy on them, but she identified as a woman. And when you see her, you see a girl. So when you see in front of these situations, how can you not legislate so that the lives of these people improve, so that these families could have a better quality of life? I can also speak about my experience with intersex people who also have a lot of difficulties. And I know that this parliament has also passed a resolution on intersex people. And I think that as legislators, as politicians, we are here to improve people's lives.
Okay. It's my job. So, sorry, it's my job. As I said, I have to cut you, but there is a follow-up question. So please, Mrs. Anderson.
Danke für die Antwort.
Thank you for that reply. However, I do feel that if people can change their gender at any time, there is a danger that all our efforts to make sure that women are equal will be countered. If a man can identify overnight as a woman, then he would be able to compete against women in professional sport, for example, with a negative consequence for women. And it would also be counter to the Women on Boards program that we've launched in the FEM committee, because then obviously on a board that person would be considered a woman. How will you be sure that the disadvantages for women is not countered, or our efforts to make sure that women are not disadvantaged are not overcome by these the possibility of changing gender?
Thank you. This is gender reassignment and gender identity is certainly not a walk in the park. It's not something which you would do it's not something definitely you would do to be on a board or to compete or to... It's something which you are born with. It's something which makes your life and the life of your family very sad and very hard. And I am sure that there won't be the cases which you mentioned. And please, let's have some respect to people who need us to help them, who need us to understand their situations, who need us to put on their shoes and walk a few paces in their shoes to understand their realities. So this is what we are here for. This is what we are all about, to help people who are in situations whereby if we don't do anything, they will live a life of misery, themselves and their families.
So, thank you. The next question goes to the ECR group, to Mrs. Jadwiga Wiśniewska. Please.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again. You keep talking about respect, and I would also expect that the committees gathered here respect the views of all of us, including the previous speaker, because this is also a form of discrimination. Commissioner-designate, you represent a country whose legislation provides for prohibition of abortion. In the treaties, the provisions and the laws of member states on family matters, and including abortion, should be respected. Regardless, these issues are being taken up at the European level, and pressure is being put to bear on regulating these issues? For example, prenatal issues. Can you guarantee that you will respect the treaties so that all member states can develop their legislation without any pressure, especially when it comes to the questions of values and the health and health? The other issue is mutilation of sexual organs. Some 200,000 women are affected by this problem. You also overlook the question of forced marriages that also happen in the European Union. Can you comment?
Commissioner, please. Commissioner-designate.
Yes. Okay, as you say, abortion is a member state competence, and yes, of course, I will always respect all the treaties. And yes, you are right about FGM, which is another terrible scourge. It's the result of patriarchy, and it is something that we really should work on. And apart from actions and maybe legislation, I think that we must look at the everyday lives where these people are and how they can be affected. And I'll give you an example. For instance, there's a refugee girl attending school, and all of a sudden, she doesn't go to school anymore. And she comes back after 2 weeks, and probably FGM has been performed on her. So we have to be away from all that we could do as a union. I think we have to be vigilant as people in our communities to look out for these realities and maybe understand what is happening, and even on forced marriages. So, of course, there is a lot that we have to do, but the first thing that we really need to do is care for our societies and observe what's going on around us, because there can be laws in place, but sometimes things are happening which we are not understanding, and if we observe and we ask questions, we can see that these things are going on, as you rightly say.
So, thank you. 30 seconds for the follow-up questions, because the first question was far longer.
Okay. Chciałabym...
I would also like you to comment in greater detail on sexual stereotypes. How do you see this problem? Do you think that the role of mother and wife is a gender stereotype? And could you also specify how are you going to fight with forced marriages who in fact are pedophile cases?
Okay, stereotyping is a very important issue, and in fact it will be addressed in our gender strategy. Stereotyping is one of the reasons why people look at other people in a particular way, because they think they should behave or they should work in a particular manner. So, you said mother, wife. Yes, in fact, I am very happy with the directive on work-life balance, because women many times are victims of this stereotype, and that is why we need, for instance, to change the contribution of fathers in families, so that there isn't this stereotyping that the mother is always the carer, or she's the 100% carer, and the father is the one who works outside the home. So yes, stereotypes are very bad, and stereotypes are what lead to certain situations where we have to change things and legislate. And with this work-life balance directive, I think that stereotypes are going to be addressed. For instance, the 10 days leave for the fathers. That's a good thing to do, because mothers and fathers, they're both parents, and they should both enjoy in the caring of their children, and also they can balance better their family life with their work outside the home. So yes, stereotypes are very bad always, and one reason that we have to do so many directives and laws is because of these stereotypes. So let's address these. And I was very happy to see some children's books recently, and in these new books they are saying how family life is, and how sharing what goes on in the family between all the members. And so these children are being brought up with these models of families now. Also, there's books with women achievers, such as scientists and artists, and this also helps to break stereotypes that mothers can also be scientists, mothers can also be artists, like fathers can be. So I think it is changing, but obviously you have to do a lot more.
No, I'm so sorry. This time we realized the clock was not running, time was not running. I was just watching, and so somehow it happened, and I was looking and looking, so 1 minute seemed to be a very long minute. So sorry, I hope now it's working, because time's running out anyway in real life. So thank you very much for your answer. The next one is the GUE group, and the speaker is Mrs. Sandra Pereira. Please, you have the word for the question.
Good afternoon, Madam Commissioner-designate. In many parts of the European Union, it's very difficult to get access to publicly funded childcare, and private ones are not affordable for many families. So in the absence of a family network able to step in with childcare, quite often one of the parents has to choose to stay home away from work in order to care for children, but it's an obstacle to women's empowerment. The Barcelona objectives remain to be completed and met. So we need a network of preschool and childcare facilities and nurseries, allowing women to fully integrate into the labour market and fulfil their professional ambitions. So I wonder what the Commission can commit in terms of implementing the Barcelona plan and objectives. Which funds will be made available within the Member States, allowing the Member States to further develop a network of childcare facilities, public funded facilities. Thank you very much.
So thank you for the question. Please, Mrs. Dalli.
Yes, thank you for that question, which I think is of the essence if we are to speak of the participation of parents in the labor market. And I speak from the experience of Malta, where we had introduced universal childcare, free of charge, childcare for parents who are studying or who are working, and the number of women in the labor force rose exponentially. So we could see that women were not working because it was not viable for them to work when they had to pay so much for childcare. Yes, we must work on this. We must find ways in order to at least have affordable childcare. And otherwise, if this is not so, this also part of what we are doing with regards to the work-life balance directive, whereby we are helping parents to balance their family responsibilities with their work responsibilities. And this is another area where we should be working in, and I shall be certainly pushing for this, and pushing also for funds in order to come out with measures to help with to help to have affordable childcare.
So, thank you. The follow-up question, please.
Well, you've spoken about this already, but could you give some more detail on sexual and reproductive rights for women? In some member states, these rights have actually gone down, and we feel it's important not to backpedal on these rights and to consolidate advances in this field and provide guarantees and equality for women when it comes to access to treatments and health checkups as well, and screening, and also ensuring that young persons, women and migrant women in particular, and other vulnerable groups have full access, and that gynecologists and specialists are made available, and that access to treatment is provided in a universal way. Thank you very much for your attention.
So please.
Yes, of course we need to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals where it concerns women's health, and we must have universal access to sexual and reproductive health and family planning, education. So I shall be working with, as I said, with the Commissioner for Health and with the Vice President for Democracy and Demography to ensure that this principle continues to be supported throughout the European Union.
Thank you. So with this, we finish our first round. And before coming to our second round, I would like to recall all members who will raise the voice right now to what was already said for the first round, that the Parliament evaluates the Commissioners-designate on the basis of their general competence, European commitment, personal independence, and also assesses the knowledge of their prospective portfolio and their communication skills, simply to give the frame. And with these words, I give the word to the next one on the speakers list, which is from EPP, Mr. Casa.
Signora President, Signora Dalli.
Madam President, Mrs. Dalli, on equality, we've already mentioned, this Parliament voted the Work-Life Balance Directive, and we're trying to address equality between the sexes, also as regards family responsibilities. Now, we'd like to see that this should be implemented. So what are you going to do to ensure that this is implemented and also in an effective way? This is my first question. Thank you. Thank you for all your work, for the work that you have done, and so far as this directive is concerned. As you know, there is a time lapse of 3 years, a time frame of 3 years for its implementation. But if I am confirmed as Commissioner, I would be helping my own country and member states to implement this directive. You know, that I have this directive very much at heart. I am committed to bring it forward because I really would like to see it put into practice. I think we can organize workshops as regards the implementations to help member states understand exactly what it entails, how it can be implemented. And I think we should raise awareness amongst workers themselves so that they really comprehend what it's all about. However, member states have an important role so that this directive will be in place. Families need to benefit from it. And the work-life balance directive will be of great help in what we've mentioned before as regards stereotypes, for example, stereotypes of who should be doing what, how the family is organized. I think each and every family should organize itself in the best way possible, as it deems necessary. And this directive would be helping the family to achieve this. So how the time is being decided when caring for children or elderly persons, the time allocated for work and for family activities. So therefore, if I'm confirmed as Commissioner, I will do my utmost to help member states on this directive.
Please.
Another theme on equality, as we have already heard, and also the rule of law. You were a minister and other members of the cabinet. And as we know from the Panama Papers, they were planning to receive 5,000 euros per day, and nothing was done. What will you do when you are commissioner so that rules bind everybody and there shouldn't be a law for gods and a law for animals? In my political life, I have always worked for good governance, for the rule of law, democracy, in favor of fundamental values in a democracy. And I've always worked for a commissioner for public standards commissioner, so that when a politician is caught red-handed, there is no time bar, but a politician should remain accountable until death. I also worked hard for the Whistleblower Act, also the laws for political parties. All these activities I've worked a lot for. Therefore, my own credentials, you know them very well.
So far, your experience, the good chair now, the bad chair is coming. I will be very strict with the timing. Okay, so the next one, Madame Gualmini, S&D, 1 minute for your question.
Frightened. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner-designate. So according to recent data, as you know, women's gross earnings pay per hour are more or less 16% below the pay of men, and the gender gap in pensions even reaches 36% as a differential. So we know that fighting inequalities is, of course, an utmost priority, both from a cultural point of view, so opposing stereotypes and, bias, but also from a quantitative point of view. So there is a mathematics in politics too. If women do the same job at the same level, at the same place, they have to get the same amount of money, as simple as that. So we welcome very much the reference to pay transparency, but in concrete, what do you intend to do to reduce or even to eliminate the gender pay gap in the legislative measure we all hope that you'll be implemented?
Madam Commissioner.
Yes, thank you for that question. As you say, the pay gap in the EU stands at 16%. And what I will be doing is, if confirmed as commissioner, is that in the first 100 days, I will work on a proposal on pay transparency, because you cannot address the gender pay gap and then eventually the pensions pay gap unless you have pay transparency. This is the tool which we are going to use in order to be able to see where the discrepancies are. So, as you know, I've been mandated by the President-elect that in the first 100 days I will present this proposal on pay transparency, but also in the gender equality strategy, there's a section on pay transparency and also measures to ensure equal pay for work of equal value. We also know that this gender pay gap is resulting also in the pension pay gap, which can be up to 36%. So we know how this happens because women, even if they start work with an equally qualified and equally experienced man, throughout their work life, because sometimes they have to work on reduced hours, so they are paying less contributions. Sometimes they have to work part-time. This is where the other directive comes in, and it's going to help this balance. Okay, so at the end of your working life, you find that not only you have earned less than your male colleague, even though you worked exactly the same thing, but even your pension is going to be affected because you paid less contributions. So it's a lot of work that we have to do, but the starting point is the pay transparency.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Okay, so two very short additional questions. The first one, will you intend to include the social partners, in the negotiations, of course, and in some preliminary agreements on the directive and on pay equality? And second one, do you intend to include in the legislative measure on pay, which will include pay equality, some indicators to monitor and evaluate the impact and the good implementation of the legislative measure?
Yes, of course. The social partners are very important, that they are part of this policy, of this proposal, which we will be presenting. This is my way also of working. I used to be Minister for Industrial Relations, and social dialogue was of the utmost importance to me, because it's very important to have the stakeholders on board when you are doing something which affects especially employment in this case. And yes, of course, we will have measuring instruments and indicators to see how we can proceed and assess the results and revise and amend and improve.
Madam Maxova, your question, 1 minute.
Hezké odpoledne. Sama jste...
Good afternoon. By way of introduction, you said that 50% of people living with disabilities found it difficult to find a job. So my question is as follows. What measures are you intending to take if you become a commissioner to protect people with disabilities and to ensure that they're included on the labour market and in society generally? I'm talking about measures which are in line with the UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities. How are you intending to improve implementation in EU institutes and agencies, and how do you intend to work with other commissioners on this issue so that the issue of people with disabilities becomes a priority? Would you welcome it if the department in charge of people with disability be put in at the secretariat so we have a cross-cutting approach? Thank you.
Okay, by 2020, it is expected that 1 in 5 EU citizens will live with a disability to some degree. And as you say, the employment of persons with disabilities is very, very low when compared to others. So as you know, there's the strategy, the disability strategy 2010-2020, which is coming to a close in this, and the Commission recently started evaluating this strategy, and also a lot has been achieved under this strategy, such as the Accessibility Act, which is currently being transposed, and the web accessibility, the disability card. So the evaluation now of this strategy will help us clearly to proceed on the way forward. I shall be working very hard to unblock the Equal Treatment Directive, and I also will continue with the implementation at EU level of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. So we have the instruments, and we can work within these instruments that we have. So what's next now is the evaluation of what has been achieved under the current strategy.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Zahrnete perspektivu osob s tělesným postižením?
Will you include persons with disabilities in the future gender strategy of the EU and in the preparation of the strategy for people with disabilities, so it's in line with Article 6 of the UN legislation on people with disabilities, so that everybody has the same rights? Women and girls with disabilities are disadvantaged 4 times over. If you approach it in this way, then we can do away with those disadvantages. Thank you.
Okay, yes, of course, mainstreaming is very important, and I shall see to the mainstreaming of persons with disability. I'm also working with the Disability intergroup and with the European Disability Forum. I have already had meetings with them, and I want persons with disability to be on board with me so that I can bring about the changes which are necessary for persons with disability. I believe that is the best way to work. Nothing about persons with disability without persons with disability. So in all that I do, persons with disability will be with me.
Madam Walsh, your question, 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner-elect, how are you? Equality is supposed to be the bedrock ensuring that our European Union is one of fairness, where our values are protected and where double standards have no place. But I'm sure you can agree that there is still some, if not a lot of work to be done on that. Picking up from your previous question, I just wanted to ask, as Equality Commissioner, you would be tasked with ensuring the full inclusion of people with disability. That includes psychosocial disability also. 1/5, as you said, of our EU population is expected to have some form of disability by 2020. How can we build further on the European Accessibility Act to ensure this inclusion? What other instruments will you push forward? And are you ready to look at increased harmonised accessibility requirements in transport services, for example? And finally, how can we encourage more students with disability to participate in EU education programmes like Erasmus? Thank you.
Answer, 2 minutes.
Yes. As I said, we shall be evaluating the strategy now to see what has been done and what needs to be done and what needs to be done better, maybe, okay? But I think also that it is very important that we unblock the Equal Treatment Directive, because that will obviously then have results on some of the questions that you are making, and also the the UNCRPD to see that it is being implemented, and that is part of the work which we shall be doing. And as I said before, that I want to work with all persons, representing persons with disability, and as I have done also in other times. And this is a very important area of policy, and as you say, a lot still needs to be done. And also I'm looking forward to mainstreaming issues of disability across the whole Commission through the use of the task force, which is there for equality mainstreaming, equality for everyone.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
I note your support of President von der Leyen's decision to allocate a portfolio protecting the European way of life, and I applaud that. But I just wanted to pick up, and I was pleased to see your written answers to a commitment on tackling hate speech, both on and offline. But I just wanted to ask, what more concretely in structure can you deliver and do you believe can be done on tackling the issue of hate crime, both on and offline? Thank you.
This type of hate speech which you speak about is obviously a very, very serious issue, not least because it keeps many people offline also, in the sense that, for example, some women stay away because of the hate speech and some things which they have to suffer because of these kinds of attitude. So we see also the result of that in women artificial intelligence and women in IT. So I shall work with the commissioners working in that area, such as.
Madam Picerno, your question, 1 minute.
Presidente. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner, you talked about acceding to the Istanbul Convention, and you said that this was one of the Commission's main priorities. Of course, we're thrilled to hear that you believe this, because the Istanbul Convention is a fundamental tool in order to fight against violence against women. But we also know that the whole accession process, it has been blocked because some conservative governments are dragging their heels and are stopping ratification for purely ideological reasons. So I'd like to know how you're planning to overcome this problem. We would like to know whether you don't think the moment has come to put forward an EU directive that tackles and combats violence against women in a consistent manner across the member states. In your written answers, in fact, you referred to the intention to tackle even emerging forms of violence against women, especially online violence against women. So we'd like to know how you're going to do this and what measures you're going to take in order to tackle something which is a real scourge for women. And I'd also like to know whether you think that the directive on the fight against violence against women should also cover these new forms of violence.
Thank you. We know that the situation today is that we have 1 in 3 women who are victims of gender-based violence and 1 in 4 women who are victims of domestic violence. And the approximate cost of this reality is 226 billion euro annually. The Istanbul Convention combines areas of EU and national competence. And as you know, that there are 21 member states which have ratified the convention. You may also be aware that during the Maltese presidency, we worked for the signature of the convention. So the EU has signed the convention, and obviously we all want the 4 Ps to be addressed: prevention, protection of victims, prosecution of offenders, and integrated policies. I shall speak to the reluctant member states and visit capitals if necessary to try and secure an agreement on this convention. For me, this is so important, and it's very hard for me to understand the resistance to it. There may be some differences in opinion of certain words used, but when you see these statistics, 1 in 3 women, a victim of gender-based violence, how can you not say, okay, let's go ahead and have the European Union ratify this convention?
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to the EU directive that should take a consistent approach and tackle violence. You know the ins and outs of it. You gave us important data. You say that so many women, whether they're poor or wealthy, whether they're unknown or famous, women across the board, it doesn't matter what their religion is, it doesn't matter what their background is, are constantly exposed to violence, different types of violence. It can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be explicit, it can be implicit. I think that we have reached tipping point. It is absolutely unacceptable for our freedom and our life. So please take specific action. I fully agree with you. I couldn't agree more. But when it comes to the gender equality strategy, we will be addressing violence. But I don't want to think about failing. I want to think about succeeding with the Istanbul Convention. So I don't want to say, oh, if we fail with the Istanbul Convention, we'll get this. I want us to succeed. Then there's the Victims' Rights Directive. That can be strengthened. And then, of course, we could make violence against women a European crime. There are other options, but I don't want to look there. I don't want to look at those options because what I want to do first is make sure that the convention is ratified.
Question, 1 minute.
Herzlichen Dank, ich werde auf Deutsch.
Thank you very much. I'll be putting my questions in German. We as Greens and me as the first woman with a visible disability are very committed to prioritizing equality and equal opportunities. And non-discrimination and equal opportunities needs to be mainstreamed across all European policies. We're convinced of that. I personally am very pleased, Ms. Dalli, to see you placing an emphasis on intersex people and the full implementation of the UN Convention on People with Disabilities. Access to opportunities, inclusion and participation are basic human rights. So a simple yes or no question to you. Will you use your veto when it comes to Commission proposals being tabled that run counter to the equality requirements? Will you put a stop to any legislative proposal that would represent an obstacle to equal opportunities and equality? Will you check all legislative work for its compatibility with human rights and equal opportunities? Thank you.
My answer is yes. I commit in my power to ensure that the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is implemented fully and without exceptions. I will also make sure that disability is mainstreamed also by means of the task force, and I will also extend the principle of equality vetting. Additionally, as I had the opportunity to tell you, I will work very closely with the Disability Intergroup and with the European Disability Forum.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Yes. Thank you, Frau Dalli. Ich möchte noch kurz...
Well, there's just a further point I would like to make. You mentioned that it would be important to be careful to ensure that people with disabilities are able to get involved and participate. But when it comes to representation of people with disabilities, nothing should be decided above our heads. It's not a nice to have thing, it should be a requirement. We in the Greens in the European Parliament will be following this very closely with close attention, and we will certainly remember the commitment that you made today, that you're committing to being the guardian of equality in Europe.
Yes. Of course you will be guarding. You will be advising me also as I said, I want an open dialogue with Parliament. I want to engage with each and every one of you in the particular areas. And I think that it is important that parliamentarians, together with civil society, are listening, and we are listening to each other, and we are exchanging our thoughts, and we are exchanging our critique, which is important. It's important that you criticize us, because constructive criticism gives better results then. So, thank you.
Madam Bruna, your question, 1 minute.
Madame Dalli, dans vos réponses.
Ms. Dalli, in your replies to the European Parliament, you said that you want to reinforce the protection of the least or the most exposed people in the society and to reinforce the rights of victims. However, in the European Union, we rarely talked about domestic violence, and not sufficiently. We haven't talked about the traumatism for the children who see their mother being subjected to domestic violence. We talk a lot about LGBTI, as you've done in your country, but the child who is broken by domestic violence has no voice with anyone, but they should be protected first and foremost. So can I ask you, you who are going to be a Commissioner for Equality, what action are you going to take to overcome this fact that these children are forgotten?
Of course, when we speak about families, when we speak about work-life balance, when we speak of families with difficulties, or families with problems of violence in them, of course, we are thinking of the children as well. The children are victims and of situations which they find themselves in, and they must have protection, and also they must be separated from the perpetrator of the violence, together with the victim. Most of the time it's the mother and the children, who all have to be protected against who is perpetrating the violence on them. But I shall be working with the minister, the commissioner, who has children in her remit on this. Thereby we can combine the issue of violence against women and domestic violence with the work she will be doing in the area of children and children's rights. So definitely protecting children is paramount in these situations, because they are the defenseless party in this. So thank you for bringing this up. And even in the strategy, when we speak about the Istanbul Convention in the strategy, we include children too.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Thank you for your reply, because this is obviously something that's very important in this discussion. So thank you for the fact that you're prepared to give attention to this issue in the future. Thank you.
Any answer, or we get to the other question?
No, she just thanked me.
Madam Rafalska, your question, 1 minute.
Commissioner-designate, you are entrusted the task of fighting with all forms of inequality and discrimination. The European Union is based on the Christian fundaments, but in the last years we have more and more cases of discrimination and even firing from work for carrying Christian symbols or following Christian values. Christians are often attacked by those who profess equality and non-discrimination, but on the other hand, discriminating against Christians. So how are you going to protect the rights of Christians against discrimination?
2 minutes.
I shall be pushing for the anti-discrimination directive, which speaks about discrimination on age, religion, or belief, disability, and sexual orientation. So I will wait for EBSCO on the 24th of November to see the outcome of this discussion on this anti-discrimination directive, which has been stuck for too long. And in that way, if we manage to unblock this, we shall be offering this protection to all the people who are discriminated against, also for the reasons that you mentioned. Obviously, it's also important, very important, to have strong equality bodies in member states, because there also they can work on the various discriminations which occur in our society. And also I think that equality charters are very important for this. But the most important thing that I see right now is the unblocking of this anti-discrimination directive. So I'm waiting with a lot of enthusiasm for the EBSCO Council later on this month to see how we can proceed.
Madam Rafalska, follow-up question, 1 minute.
Pani Komisarz.
Commissioner-designate, do you know the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg on the British Airlines that discriminated their employer on the grounds of religion? We have a case in Poland of an employee an employee of IKEA for quoting the Bible. Don't you think that these cases are especially important? What's at stake is not only Christian life, but also protection of individual freedoms.
I go by the maxim of don't do to others what you don't want done to you. And that is why I think that this anti-discrimination directive is important, because you will have, it is about equal treatment, whatever your religion, whatever your belief, whatever your age, whatever your sexual orientation. Okay, so let's work to unblock this directive.
Madam, now this is very challenging for me. Madam Vosenberg-Rionidi. Good.
Thank you very much. Κυρία Dalli, καλησπέρα.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Dalli. I'm a Greek lawyer, and I have been so for 3 decades, and I feel the obligation to tell you that it is a blow against democracy in your country and against the rule of law in your country, the fact that you haven't found the perpetrator of Caruana Galizia, not because she was a woman, but because she fought for the truth and because she was an investigative journalist. Now, my question is the following. I want to talk about the glass ceiling. I was responsible for the relevant report in the previous parliamentary term, and you know that this report talks about the problems that women have in their careers and the problem that women in science and research have, and the glass ceiling there. We want to increase participation of women in these areas. So I'd like to know whether you have a flagship initiative on this, or whether you're planning to harness the current existing policies in order to get rid of prejudices and stereotypes that are stopping women from being equally represented in STEMs. Thank you.
Answer 2 minutes.
Okay, I had the opportunity to say earlier that the investigations on the Caruana Galizia femicide are ongoing, and after the first 50 days, 3 people were arrested and placed under indictment. Now, with regards to the glass ceiling, yes, it's still very much there. I think it would be an understatement to say that. With regard, I am a firm believer that we should eliminate stereotypes and have more women in STEM. Incidentally, I happen to be the person who promoted the International Day for Girls and Women in Science at the United Nations. The 11th of February is the United Nations celebrates that day on a proposal which I had put forward. So that is how much STEM is close to my heart, and getting women and girls in STEM, girls to study and women who are already there to have decision-making positions in STEM, so that they can encourage more girls and also serve as role models. Obviously, the addressing of stereotypes in our gender, I forgot what we are doing is that we are addressing these stereotypes in our gender strategy. The word comes now, and one. Oh my God. Okay.
Follow-up question.
Thank you very much for your answer. My second question is also about equality. Since you will become Commissioner for Equality, I'd like to talk about the digital gap that women face. I think this has to be handled in a particular manner. And again, I'd like to know whether you're planning to put forward a flagship initiative on this, so that we can actually say in the future that women are represented in the sector of technology, information, communication, as well as mass media, because there are very high salaries in these sectors, but the women aren't represented, and that doesn't honor our democracy or the rule of law. Thank you.
Yes, IT cannot remain a men's domain, and as you rightly say, it's very high paid. It's a very high paid profession, and that continues to have an effect then on the gender pay gap also. So it is all connected. But we must really address stereotypes. Why aren't women being channeled, and girls into that direction? And that is why I mentioned the International Day for Women and Girls in Science. But also with regards to academic achievement, I know of a case where a science subject was not obligatory, and girls were not being channeled to take it. Once it was made obligatory, girls were getting better results than boys. So it's really a question of stereotyping and of counseling about professions and where should we lead these girls. You know, so we don't channel them through this, and that's why we have the digital gap also in.
Madam Rodriguez, your question, 1 minute.
Gracias, Comisaria
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Commissioner-elect. I would like to congratulate you on your bold statements in favor of equality. Discrimination against LGBTI persons is certainly present in the European Union. It takes different forms. Verbal abuse, online abuse, physical aggression, and it can impact on many aspects of life when it comes to access to education, to mention just one. So the directive on non-discrimination, I'm sure you will know that inclusion of sexual orientation as a ground has been cited as the cause for blocking this file. So what is your strategy when it comes to convincing those who are not convinced, and how will you work with those who are working on this at the national level and ensure that gender identity can be updated in national legislation?
I will explain that sexual orientation sorry, there you are, is not a choice. So why, if this is the reason why the directive is being blocked, I will want to understand that, because I don't, if this is the reason why. But there's more, you know, like in some member states, there's less than 50% that of people who believe that LGBTI persons should have equal rights to heterosexuals. So this is the environment which we are working on. So as you know, there's the list of actions which is about improving the rights of LGBTI people and their families, monitoring and enforcement of existing rights, supporting key actors who are responsible to advance LGBTI rights. So, and there's a lot of work going on. So we will now have to evaluate the outcome of the current list of actions and then propose strong measures. But as you say, we need to move forward this horizontal anti-discrimination directive. That is the way which I want to go, and I want to try and understand why it is so difficult to unblock. And also, I want to mention the high-level group on equality and anti-discrimination, who are also doing a lot of work.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Cita también en sus respuestas que
in your replies, you talked about the need to fight for the rights of the most vulnerable in society and defend human rights. So I wanted to ask your opinion on the Spot Life initiative, which has been allocated millions of euros and seeks to coordinate action on countering violence against young people. So how are we going to ensure that we can follow UN directives on institutionalized, individual, and all forms of violence, and regardless of the victims, whether we're talking here about refugees or people without papers?
As you know, we are committed to SDGs and to rights which come out of instruments with vis-a-vis the people of different realities and all that you mentioned, and we obviously work internally and externally, and we support all initiatives and all legislation in terms of protecting the rights of the different people. So obviously we shall be working in the areas which you mentioned and push forward the rights of the different people which you spoke about.
Mr. Nicolaou, your question, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak Greek, as you've probably noticed. The European Union and the governments are promoting the policy of reconciling work and life in order to deal with the impact of women working and the fact that there aren't enough measures to support families. So you have flexicurity, and that means that people work very long hours. That means that the working mother and woman finds it very difficult, and you protect motherhood, but only if big companies don't have to shell out money, if it doesn't cost them that much. 71% of female employees don't even get the proper maternity benefits. A lot of pregnant women don't get the basic protection from redundancies, as according to the ILO. So what is your position on flexicurity and on all employees and workers being protected when they're pregnant to make sure that pregnant women are not made redundant?
Yes, the protection of conditions of employment and the protection of employees is obviously a very important issue. And as you said, we speak about work-life balance, and that is exactly to improve the quality of life of families of working families. But also, obviously, there is always work time for improvement and room for improvement. And the issues which you mentioned are issues which I shall be discussing with Commissioner-designate Schmidt, whereby we can discuss these conditions of work which you mentioned, and we'll see a way forward on how we can propose ways and how what you mentioned can be addressed.
Mr. Nicolaou, follow-up question, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Now, just to be a little bit more specific, what is your position on the following? The European Court of Justice ruling published on the 22nd of January 2018, which allows pregnant workers to be made redundant when there are mass redundancies. This opens the path to additional exemptions, which means that we will end up with no protection of pregnant women and new mothers. Thank you.
The answer, 1 minute.
Yes, I will have to see that decision, and I will be very happy to meet you and discuss it. But obviously, pregnant women should have protection.
Mr. Saliba, your question, 1 minute.
Commissario-nominat Dalli.
Dear Commissioner-designate, as a Maltese person, I think I am very proud that you have been tasked with equality as a portfolio. During your political career in Malta, where you were responsible for the same sector, you managed to implement a social revolution where you managed to make our country give an example to the rest of the European countries in terms of protection of minorities. I hope that within 5 years we will be able to speak about a more equal Europe after your determination of your mandate as a commissioner. The Work-Life Balance Directive has been adopted, and the SD group was one of the most political parties that were active in supporting this directive. However, nowadays we are facing a situation where a number of member states are trying to create obstacles and I agree with you that the European social pillar of social rights should be implemented immediately. But I would like to ask you whether you believe that the scope should be strengthened and widened to include the rights to self-employed and the rights of adoptive parents. Thank you. Thank you for this question. Yes, obviously it is a directive that, as I have already said to Mr. Casa, I will be working together with member states in order to make sure that it is implemented. You are asking me whether I agree with the extension of the scope of the directive. I believe that the focus should be on implementation within the next 3 years. I think we should make sure that the directive as it is should be implemented in the member states. And then we know that the directive has a review clause, thanks to which we can, if needed, use this clause and see whether we need to widen the scope of this directive and see if we can include also the rights that you have mentioned. But I would like that for the next 3 years, we work towards the fact that every member state is implementing correctly this directive. Yes, I would like to ask you about a sector that is very close to my heart, the sector of people with disabilities. The strategy between the years 2010 and 2020 is aiming towards implementing the directive, the UN Convention of Rights with people with disability. I would like to ask you, how will you make sure that there is mainstreaming in all the political sectors? Will you make sure that there is a review of applications so that the convention is fully implemented? And will you relaunch the convention with more ambitious aims for the next 10 years? And I would also like to thank you for your personal commitment that you made sure that the associations of people with represent people with disability will also be present in this work and consultations. Thank you. Now that this strategy is nearing its end, we will be evaluating it and making sure that we can move forward. But the evaluation of the strategy for the period 2010-2020 needs to be concluded, because during the evaluation, we need to see things more clearly. We need to be able to see what were the deficiencies, on what we can improve. Yes, and you asked me about mainstreaming, the mainstreaming of people with disabilities rights. We will make sure that there is mainstreaming in all the DGs, and we will make sure that this convention will be at the heart of all the policies. That's why we will have this task force, and all the things that you are mentioning, we will be discussing them within the Commission thanks to this mainstreaming. And I think this is a very important step forward in terms of equality.
One question for 1 minute for a question.
Sí, gracias, presidentas. Gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairpersons and Commissioner-designate. The European strategy on gender, so the European gender strategy, are you taking into account the specific dimension affecting women who are disabled? And so that's something I'd like to ask you to do. Now, on the European women's strategy for disabled persons, is look at the specific situation faced by women who are living with disabilities. So if we're going to draw up a new strategy from scratch, it's going to take far too much time. Will be in the next parliamentary term. So we need to adapt the European Accessibility Act, and look at the Convention of Human Rights. So we've got a period of transposition that's 3 + 3 years. Some of it goes up to 2030. So you're talking about comparing equality and equal opportunities with climate change. Well, let's make the changes and let's raise awareness. More than that.
Sir? Yes, disability will be in the gender strategy, because again we are speaking about mainstreaming, and also the mainstreaming within the work of the Commission. But with regards to the strategy, I think that first we have to evaluate. I'm not saying that we have to wait until 2030. What I'm saying is that before committing to other means of working in this area, first we have to evaluate what we have, what we had, and then carry on from there, from what we have learned from the previous strategy.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
The European Accessibility Act doesn't affect micro enterprises, urban transport, housing, catering and hospitality and many other sectors. I think this is an opportunity to make a few corrections here. And on equality matters, we shouldn't be getting lost in demagogy. We shouldn't get lost in the details and get into infighting. So let's leave anything ideological out. Let's put that to one side and become united by the commitment to human rights, which have no ideology, just as peace has no ideology.
Exactly, but that is exactly the reason why we have to analyze this and evaluate it for the reasons also that you mentioned, and say how can we move on from all that you are mentioning here, which are all very good points. They are points which I heard when I met with the representative NGO, and you are reflecting exactly what they have told me. So it's at the back of my mind that during this evaluation, I will take in these points which you are making, which are very good points. Thank you.
Madam Rodriguez Palop, your question, 1 minute.
Gracias. Thank you very much. Mrs. Dalli, many domestic workers run the risk of being exploited, and they're not protected because there's a lack of inspections, among other things. There is abuse, there can be harassment by their employees, there is mistreatment, sometimes they even lose their jobs. And in the cases of migrant workers, they can be deported as well. Sometimes they are badly paid but have to work 18 hours, they have only very short breaks, and sometimes they don't have days off. Are you planning to take measures in order to improve the working conditions of these domestic workers? Are you going to promote the ratification by the Member States and the Council of the ILO Convention on Domestic Workers? And my last point, will you adopt measures in order to improve and protect workers in certain areas dominated by women where there's a lot of insecurity, such as hotel cleaning staff?
The answer, 2 minutes.
Thank you for that question. Yes, of course, this is an area which should be addressed and will be addressed. In fact, I have already spoken with Commissioner-designate Schmidt about these realities. But this is again, I mentioned the task force. This is where we can work together by across portfolios. And this area which you mentioned of domestic workers and of conditions of work, and on the ILO convention, which all fall within the remit of the Commissioner-designate for jobs. But there will be a person in that working within that portfolio, which will be speaking about women's rights and the conditions of women workers in these particular situations which you mentioned. So yes, it will be the problems which you mentioned will certainly be addressed.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Microphone, please. Microphone for the speaker. We know that a lot of these domestic workers are migrant women, and therefore there could be labor exploitation, and there could even be smuggling or trafficking, because it's very easy to hide it in the domestic work sector. Are you going to take measures to ensure that the migrant status of these women doesn't make them more vulnerable for trafficking, for labor exploitation, and what is going to happen with their salaries and pensions, especially at a time when public pensions are giving way to private pensions? What is your opinion on pan-European pension products? Have you assessed the impact that this will have on women, given the gender pay gap and the gender pension gap that already exists?
Well, as you know, there is the Race Equality Directive, which provides redress for discrimination in all areas of life. And one of these areas is conditions for access to employment and employment conditions. So really what we should see is that the directive is being implemented. I know that this is easier said than done, but what I'm saying is that the protection is there. But we will have to see on how to check on the implementation of this directive, and therefore I should be working with other commissioners also on this issue.
Madam Fritzon, your question, 1 minute.
Thank you. Ms. Dalli, I will ask my question in Swedish.
Over the last decade, we've seen active opposition to women's basic rights. If we look at the effects, some gender equality indexes show that there are a lot of inequalities between the sexes which continue to obtain. There was a European Parliament report recently that showed that developments have been different from country to country for different effects. In some cases, we've got rhetorical statements, but in other cases, initiatives and measures have been taken. We can see that we're seeing a backlash for women's rights in the European Union. I want to be able to tell my daughters that we should combat this backlash. So my question to you is, how are you going to tackle this backlash, and what will be your first initiative? Thank you.
I think that our work on gender equality, as you have seen, the importance which the president-elect has given to this area of policy, is a way of seeing that women's rights are not only protected but enhanced. So this will be a commission not only gender balanced, as you can see from the number of the commissioners, but also a commissioner which is on the ground working on the protection of women's rights. I can assure you that it is very high on the agenda of the President-elect von der Leyen, and this is also the reason why there is a standalone portfolio for equality, so that the work of this portfolio can be focused on also on the problems which you mentioned, and also the gender equality strategy, which should be coming out soon, is also addressing some of the realities which you mentioned.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Thank you. We know that the possibility for women's possibilities to keep themselves is essential for them to be able to be independent. So we need to focus on work, and we need to combat discrimination and inequalities on the labor market. You've talked about a number of measures. Are you going to focus in this area so that women can be really independently from an economic point of view?
Financial independence is of the essence. Okay, every woman should be able to support herself, and also once a woman is financially independent, other realities don't happen anymore. For instance, if you are financially independent and in an abusive relationship, you can choose to leave that relationship because you are not financially dependent on your abuser. So to work on creating more jobs for women, create more education, more training for women, is all working towards this reality which we have today, whereby quite a number of women are not financially independent.
Madam Phillips, your question, 1 minute.
Thank you. Commissioner-elect, you said earlier that you were very happy with the Work-Life Balance Directive, and whilst there are very many positives to it, it only provides for 10 days for fathers to take care of their children when they are born, and even this is not mandatory. And while parents are each entitled to 2 months of parental leave, it does not have to be paid at a rate above the poverty line, and therefore is often not taken up, as families cannot afford it. This is an equality issue not only for women who still bear an unfair share of caring responsibilities, but also for men, LGBTQI+ parents, and parents of all genders who would like to be able to afford to take more time off to care for their children. What will you propose to address the gender imbalance between those taking up leave for caring responsibilities? What will you propose so that families don't risk poverty when taking parental leave? How will you push member states to provide for decent remuneration levels for this leave? Thank you.
2 minutes for the answer.
I guess it's never enough, is it? So, but we started with this, this directive, which is in the right direction, I must say. And that is why I said I will monitor member states to see how they are implementing this directive, and maybe even hold workshops and presentations, in the sense that I will make them aware that this is added value to the place of work when you have such measures. Obviously, we want to do more, and as I mentioned, in 3 years it will be reviewed, and also I think that employers will realize that this was a good thing. But as you know, whenever you have to do something which is related to industrial relations, you want your social partners on board, which is how it should be. It's important, the part of social dialogue. And the more we make the social partners understand the value added to good conditions of work, for when workers have better conditions, they are better workers, they produce better, and they have more peace of mind at the place of work. So it is to the benefit actually of who is employing that there are very good conditions. So all you said is very true, and I will have more discussions on this even with Commissioner-designate Schmidt when we speak about conditions of employment. But also there's the equality perspective in it, and we must see. Okay, we mustn't see.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you. The traditional division of work and care responsibilities in the household is shifting, but only very slowly. Talking about it is important, but we've talked for far too long. You mentioned workshops and speaking to other commissioners and so forth. Legislation is what makes the difference. What will you do concretely to overcome this injustice, which will be more than workshops, more than talking? Thank you.
The microphone.
Yes, as I'm sorry, I'm going to have to repeat this, but once we review the directive and see how it worked, and if there probably will be scope for opening it up, then we will consider these proposals which you are making. Thank you.
Madam Semedo, your question, 1 minute.
Deutsch sprechen. Sehr geehrte Designierte, hier bin ich, Kommissar.
I'm going to speak German. Commissioner-designate, Ms. Dalli. I'm going to focus on the Istanbul Convention as well. I didn't want to focus too much on it, but I would nevertheless like to know from you what specific possibilities there are in the EU treaty in order to recognize violence against women as an EU crime, and you can protect people, and how you can have better integration of the victims. I think that's very important as well. I'm talking about women who are victims of violence or who've survived cancer, but then find it difficult to get back into the labor market. Thank you.
2 minutes for the answer.
Well, I can see. In inclusion of violence against women as a Euro crime, there you are, requires unanimity as well. Okay, so it is also mentioned in the guidelines. So, but I would rather first concentrate on the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. I think that is the gold standard. So let's concentrate on that first. But I have to say also that making violence against women a Eurocrime also requires unanimity. So we're basically in the same water. But we can also strengthen the victims' rights directive, and there I will have to work with Commissioner-designate Reinders. And also we can strengthen non-legislative action to combat violence against women. But my preferred route is the ratification of the convention by the EU.
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Und würden Sie auch eine
Would you also have an awareness-raising campaign for protection of women against domestic violence, and also a protection campaign for older citizens? And would you generally strengthen the position of the victim in the EU? It should be one of the basic tenets of the EU that nobody should be subject to violence and that nobody should be repressed in any way. Thank you.
Yes, of course. That will be included in the gender equality strategy. We're also including online violence against women in the strategy, and the points that you are making will also be, because it's a very robust section which deals with violence against women in this strategy, which shall soon come out.
And the last speaker would be Madam Jaroka with your question. Yes, 1 minute for that.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner-designate, congratulations for your nomination, and after the painful realization of the death of the wonderful Maltese Daphne Caruana Galizia, it's wonderful to see another strong woman. We were shocked that women are being killed in your country for journalism, but my question would just follow up on another question where you were talking about the gender pension pay gap, which is 37, as you said, and the other 16.2%, which is the gender pay gap itself. Would you have some concrete steps on this?
2 minutes for the answer.
Yes, as obviously, first we have to establish the measuring instrument. So in the first 100 days, I will have to present this pay transparency measure. Okay, so once we have this transparency measure, then we can address the gender pay gap and the pensions pay gap. So it is work which I will be doing at the outset. It is one of the first areas which I am mandated to work upon. This is how serious and how this problem is, and how the Commission is looking at it with a lot of prominence. And we obviously want to get results, because it is unaccepted that you have a 36% gap in pensions, especially. But this is the residue of all that we have been saying here all along in terms of the life cycle, the work cycle of a woman, that our progression is many times interrupted, because we work sometimes for less hours, because the family needs are what they are. And also sometimes when you are on maternity leave or on working on reduced hours, you may also miss on a promotion. And therefore you don't continue with your progression. So we are being penalized for the simple fact that we are women and we have children. We want to have children. We want to work. It is important that we contribute by our work. But then who is seeing to these realities where we end up with this discrepancy?
Follow-up question, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. And because of these discrepancies are creating the further povertization of women and children, I would like to ask you about those for whom the pay gap is only a dream, because in portfolio there will be so many who has no jobs at all. There are 120 million poor, only 16 million are Roma, but thank you very much for mentioning the situation of the Roma. But do you think that we could further elaborate with the Parliament, with the Finnish Presidency and the Croats on upscaling the Roma strategy to an all-EU anti-poverty strategy, because there are not only Eastern European ghettos, but all over around Europe, and the World Bank maps from 2016 show you perfectly which are those ghettos, which are those 30,000, 80,000 people, settlements, which we have to tackle. So would you go further on the anti-poverty of these poor?
One of my first visits will be to a Roma settlement. And Roma people are the most discriminated in the European Union, and at 61%. So, as you know, there is the Roma Framework Strategy, which has 4 priorities: education, employment, healthcare, and housing. And Also, you know that this framework is coming to an end, and we will be reviewing this strategy, and that is why I want to visit a settlement, so that I know more about what I am reviewing, and we will evaluate how best to proceed in terms of follow-up. So also the post-2020 framework will have a stronger focus on anti-Gypsyism. Okay, so I can assure you that a lot of work will be done in that area.
Very good, your last answer, but there is no rest for you, Madam Commissioner-designate, as now the floor is yours again, and you have 5 minutes for your final statement, please.
Okay, so thank you for the exchange and for the important questions posed. And what we can see from what we spoke here together today, that equality can never be taken for granted. I know that I have your trust to take on. I know that if I have, I don't do that, if I have your trust to take on the role of Commissioner, I will need to answer several tough questions for us to achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves. And I look forward to these exchanges. So to conclude, I will make a personal observation. Whenever I visited an elementary school, a nursery, or a kindergarten as minister, I always observed how little children interact without distinction, how children do not even have a notion of discrimination, how children interact with other children despite differences. They do not discriminate. They do not hate. Children teach us the meaning of unconditional love. Discrimination is learned later in life, and we need to work so that society unlearns its discriminatory ways and stereotypes about persons with particular personal characteristics. We need to value diversity and inclusion. We are stronger together as a union of member states, as we are stronger together as diverse societies. We are stronger when we are all valued, when all are included. I will work tirelessly for equality for women and men, race and ethnic minorities, with particular attention to the Roma minority, religious and non-religious minorities, persons who are discriminated because of their age, persons with disabilities, and gender and sexual minorities. If confirmed by Parliament, I will work for a Europe of equality with concrete results. I reiterate that we have enough equality for everyone. We need to make it a reality that is experienced by all. In the words of Nelson Mandela, which have and will continue to guide me, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or her background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Thank you.
So, dear Commissioner-designate, Mrs. Dalli, dear members of the European Parliament, we made it. So you see, it's really a tough cookie. All these questions, a wide journey when it's about equality. And we see equality that is really an issue that needs a fit, tough, that needs a committed commissioner, and a commissioner that is not only deep in the portfolio, but a commissioner that is also understanding what does it mean to be discriminated, what does it mean to suffer when there are inequalities. And so many people, different groups are touched with this issue. So we really had this wide range of questions right now covering all groups. Amongst all and above all, and I speak on behalf of the FAM committee, women who are exposed to inequalities in their daily life. So you gave us right now clear and pragmatic answers on work-life balance. What does it mean to be implemented? What do we need further in the future from the Commission? You tackled the questions on the gender pay gap, because this is really a shame. We know already for decades and decades and decades that we are moving so slowly, and we need transparency as a step in order to really know how to implement measures that women are treated the same way than men. You tackled also the question of violence against women, Istanbul Convention, that has to be really lively, and how difficult the situation is in so many countries, and what excuses we always hear from governments and whomever not to do what has to be done. You were referring also, of course, to the gender strategy that we need from the European Union in order to tackle all those measures, because it's nice when we do one piece of the mosaic, but of course we have to give the whole picture life. And of course you were dealing with a lot of other issues that are of the utmost importance for more equality between men and women, and of course also dealing with discrimination that happens in all fields of life. And with these words, I just would like to congratulate you for this marathon of questions and answers covering all those issues. We all know right now it's up to the coordinators to decide. We are quickly on all that, so we do our best. And we just thank you for this marathon and for your performance. And we'll give right now the word also to my co-chair, Madame Nicole Sonova.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madame Dalli. I have to say you were very disciplined. You were very good in timing. In this, you succeeded. On behalf of AMPL, I have to say that your portfolio is so wide and your plans are so ambitious. And we would love to cooperate with you on all of your ambitious plans. But I have to say that we live in times that I think we should only promise what we can actually deliver, because out there are thousands of people with huge expectations from Brussels, as they call European Union, right? And when it comes to our new initiatives, I think that we should first evaluate how we succeeded in implementation of the old ones. Because, I mean, let's be honest, we didn't succeed in all areas. There are still member states where people with disabilities face enormous discrimination. There are people on wheelchairs who can't enter the streets because of the barriers. They can't go to cinemas, to theaters. They can't find a job. They can't succeed on a labor market. The enterprises, the employers, rather pay the fee than employ people with disabilities. When we talk about another form of discrimination, we have to talk about people 50 plus on the labor market. They face enormous discrimination in various member states. And this is the sandwich generation that we have to mention when it comes to work-life balance, because we can't only talk about the young families with young children, but we also have to talk about 50 plus people who have to take care of their kids from one side and from the other side of their aging parents. And the last but not least, the huge discrimination about the socially excluded communities that in many member states are the Roma communities, separated and segregated. We have member states where we discriminate openly the Roma kids by sending them to special schools where they can't really end up finish their elementary schools. And they end up the elementary school, the special schools, when they're 16-year-old, they cannot read nor write. And we expect them to succeed on the labor market. And I'm very happy that Madame Dalli showed the interest to be a part of the delegation of EMPL that will go to Slovakia to visit the separated and segregated areas with Roma communities, and we have to stop it together. Thank you.
That's it. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. The hearing is over.